Hello everyone, welcome back to Dan's Astrology. I'm here to record a follow-up video to my last one, which was recorded on September 10th. Today is September 12th. I took a break from recording videos yesterday, and what was interesting anyways is that my last video I recorded, I was speaking about a Byung handbook called The Expulsion of the Other. And I was motivated to read a chapter from that book about globalism and terrorism. And unintentionally, this timed up with the assassination of Charlie Kirk, who, to be fair, I am not really up on all my right-wing pundits, and I'm not going to speak too much about that kind of stuff. Or maybe I will. The thing is that I think the point, one thing that I've noticed is that I've been doing these videos for a few years now, and that obviously I believe astrology is real, or else I wouldn't be doing it, and that eclipse season is obviously popping off right now. There's lots of, this is a very eclipse season kind of thing to happen. There's also a lot of things happening in the background, and I wrote a big list of current events and stuff like that, but for this video, I'm not going to go down. There's protests breaking out all over the world. There war and protests and all kinds of drama, right? And there's some kind of issue, I think, about the challenge of divination and trying to do divination in respect to current events when things are so dramatic and stuff like that. And I've noticed that when it comes to eclipse season, sometimes it's like my own creative process in terms of trying to come up with ideas to do for videos or stuff like that. That, for example, this whole thing about what I did in my last video, there's something about, I wasn't explicitly predicting a terrorist attack, but for some reason, I was thinking about the Byung handbook at the end of the book, there's a chapter about listening, and this, the practice of listening to people, as opposed to going on a big monologue or something like that, right? And that I had this great experience of reading that book while I was getting my pharmaceutical treatment done, where I have to have this pharmaceutical drug fed into me through an IV, and I was reading this Byung handbook at the end, and there's something about the attitude of listening to everything that it was just sort of, sometimes, you ever had this experience when you're reading in public, and sometimes if it's like a stressful book, you're like, oh, I don't know if I feel, the Byung hand, it was like there was some kind of like, there was a good vibe, despite the fact that you might think that this is kind of a heavy topic and all this kind of stuff. And I was thinking about, with Saturn and the sort of the Senex and all this kind of stuff, that there is this sort of the quality of listening, peace and stillness and meditation and listening to other people. But then in all this, there's some sort of itch. The creative process was like, wait a minute, what about this one about globalism and terrorism, right? And it's just sort of like, there's something about the creative process where you're like following the creative itch of like, there's some kind of like, I'm feeling like I'm more led in this direction, even if it's more about like, because for some reason, terrorism seems to resonate, or globalism seems to resonate, right? Or there have been other times in previous years where I've had ideas for videos, or maybe I'll go and pick out some of my literature and I'll read it or something like that, and it's sort of like, it's like my own little creative process is like a little microcosm within the whole macrocosm, and sometimes whatever I'm doing, there's the possibility of like dark synchronicities, basically, right? And so I'm just I recorded that video yesterday, and I'm leaving it up there, and I'm basically leaving it up in the sense that when I record this video, I don't know if I was recording as the thing happened with Charlie Kirk, or like I didn't find out about it until after I'd recorded the video and uploaded it, did I find out that Charlie Kirk got shot. And it's sort of like the topic both of the terrorism and the fact that to do with apparently when Charlie Kirk went to Japan and was speaking to Japan's equivalent of the MAGA movement, and somehow basically there's some kind of strange irony in all this to me, because don't you guys think that if you are anti-globalist or whatever the hell this ideology is supposed to be about, that to go to like the foreign country in the Far East and basically encourage them to be xenophobic nationalists as a mirror of what you're doing, like and then to basically balkanize everybody into these sort of like ethno-nationalist states that are at war with each other, and then you're gonna have then you're gonna have people just selling arms, these multinational corporations selling arms to a bunch of balkanized ethno-states, and it doesn't matter who kills each other off, the arms dealers are still gonna make money, and this is, so you want to go around giving talks for people on, pro NRA, weapons industry talking points. There's lots of money behind it, right? And so it's like, it's a big cash cow, right? So there's something about all this where, I don't know, I'm not going to say anything. I don't really know about Charlie Kirk that much one way or another, but I have to admit that sometimes in my own creative process, I'm creating not from a place of like, there's something I can think about, like manifestation or something like that, where I feel like there's still some sort of conflict that I feel where I'm not claiming to be enlightened. Like I'm not claiming like I have overcome the struggle of samsara, or that I'm not in conflict with what's going on in the world, or that there's something that the New Agers tend to go in this direction. Like I've kind of just given up trying to talk to people on Facebook, but the kinds of stuff that typically would get posted on Facebook are things like the not being divided into left and right or something like that. But the problem about this, I've got news for you, that in order to have an election in a democracy, you're going to have to be divided. That's literally what a democracy is. A democracy is, you're going to have to choose a party to vote for, and we're going to take the whole population and we're going to divide the population up into the people that voted for this party or voted for that party. Or maybe if you've reached a state of wholeness and enlightenment, you see that democracy is beneath you, basically, and you're not going to turn up to vote, and you're going to be like, oh, because it's all just rigged, so we're the enlightened masses who are apolitical and not politically involved, and so we just get to like sit on our, we get to just complain about everything in a sense of, superiority, that we've removed we don't vote anymore because we're above it, and then we're just too cool for voting or something like that, right? And that's how we've achieved wholeness or something, right? Now, if you want to vote in democracy, it involves this kind of division, right? And to suggest that anything which inherently divides people into this opinion or that opinion is wrong is totalitarian and undemocratic. Like that's literally, you're going to need to allow people to divide themselves, to designate themselves as having a different political identity or political belief or political opinion, and have that be something that you can express that freely without a threat of violence, and you have a free democratic society. If you just have a undivided society, that's totalitarianism, basically, right? So this is why I think there's a certain kind of problem with a certain apolitical or illiterate kind of attitude towards politics. I think that it is true that there is also two sides of it, though, that there is a kind of divide and conquer mentality that could be maybe described as balkanization, right? And that the there is also, there could, so there I don't know, maybe I'm getting a bit distracted here, but the point about all this is what am I doing here? I'm doing astrology. A lot of times people criticize astrology because astrology is inherently taking a whole circle and dividing it into 12 parts, treating each person in these 12 parts differently, and then also respecting the fact that there's a whole culture of people who prefer a Vedic system, which is uses a sidereal zodiac, so that you're gonna have to like switch everything if you want to talk to sidereal people, right? So astrology itself is extremely divisive. That you are basically just in order to understand, to derive a meaning of a thing, you're using a system of division. And so there's something about division itself and not looking at things in this totalizing way, that we can I think that you can understand that you live in a world where it's a number of different forces playing out, right? And that to think that you are the sole manifester of everything going on is a kind of inflation. So obviously it's an act of co-creation or whatever. And there's something about something I've noticed about my own process in this is that sometimes I might be into, if I'm getting into like talking about all this stuff, some other astrology channels might go more deeper into the paranormal side of it with like aliens and stuff like this. I was exploring one of these kind of things in my videos, right? And I was thinking about I had this idea to talk about Majestic 12. If you've heard of that, the X-Files talks about it. Serial Experiments Lain talks about it. And after I talked about that, I took my dog for a walk, and there was like somebody who was out of town visiting, like a van that had Alberta license plates, I think. And that's how I knew it was out of town. And the van had the word Majestic written on the side of the van. So so this is a kind of thing about the synchronicity, is that was I unconsciously, there's certain things that filter in through the unconscious, is what I'm trying to say. And that maybe the inspiration to talk about the Majestic 12 thing was actually somehow unconsciously triggered by the presence of a van that had the word Majestic written on it, but it was like within the sequence of time, I saw the van after I'd already mentioned that. So maybe I was like somehow intuitively predicting I was going to see a van that said Majestic written on it, which would give me the idea or something. You see what I'm saying? There's also I experience all sorts of weird synchronicities like this, and there's something about my own creative process. I have to admit that I took a course from J.F. Martel. I took a bunch of weird studies courses, and I've been taking a break from them. I haven't been doing weird studies courses in a while. But the first one I took was about this book. I don't know. I have to admit, I'm always kind of self-conscious about this because I'm just taking a risk, Eddie. I don't know what I'm like. I always feel I'm. Anyways, I took a course on this, the Reclaiming Art, G.F. Martel, in this he talks about how Carl Jung had this idea of the naive artist as being somebody who is creating, you're like just putting images down, or you're like working with things, but you don't have like the full conceptual plan laid out intentionally, and you're just sort of like naively working with things. And I was trying to incorporate that idea in some of my art making, or that I was like, I like making music, I like making ambient music, and instead of just having me performing on some synthesizers, I'm trying to think of like what to use to make a music video, or to incorporate it into some sort of multimedia art form. And there was this, while I was doing this, I made this one video where I started using, it was in the midst of all the crazy stuff happening in America, right? And it's sort of like, I have to admit that I was basically probably just reacting to the stress. I mean, I'm a Canadian, so I'm at least removed from this, but I'm seeing when they had like the No King's Day and the stuff in LA and the militarized police and all this kind of stuff, like I was just like, what kind of outlet do you have for this? Do you I was doing it was also like I was doing therapy last year with a therapist, and just recently during this Eclipse season cycle, my therapist has announced that he himself drove himself into a chat GPT psychosis, right? So I'm actually staying pretty grounded and stable and all this kind of stuff. And like, it's like the people that I do therapy with are having more problems than I am, but they're people in America who are basically like, it's like, it's gaslighting to suggest that all this crazy shit in the world, that you're just supposed to be like cool as a cucumber and not feel any emotions or not feel any conflict or not feel any drama, and that there's something about like in the midst of all this you're supposed, like, it seems kind of unreasonable to whatever. I mean, you're working with the material at hand, right? The raw material at hand, and in the midst of all this drama and all this conflict, I was thinking about, like, why don't you have like the like drone footage of buildings and stuff like that, and I could slow it down and have these kind of like over, and like having like, like the in a movie or something like that, like the cityscape and like the moving, and like that would be. And so for some reason I decided to pick Las Vegas. Perhaps not, it could also partly be influenced by me being into Blade Runner 2049 and how there's have the scenes in Las Vegas set there. I was also kind of thinking about Baudrillard, and to be honest, I've never been to Vegas. I don't like Vegas. I have to admit, I was expressing negativity in the fact that I don't like Las Vegas very much. And then I was thinking, like, I could apply the same thing, that there's certain, I always feel like I'm compared to certain sort of standard of masculinity that's like, that makes like football and sports the most important thing, and that my own, maybe I wouldn't be so lonely if I was just a football guy and you go watch the Super Bowl with your bros or something like that, and I have a certain negativity and resentment around that. And so I was using Las Vegas. I decided to use some football stuff, and then afterwards, with all this, I realized that in the same way that when I was doing this Byung Chul Han thing, and I decided I was drawn to do the chapter on terrorism and globalism rather than the one about listening. Then in the same way, I was drawn to use something about Las Vegas and football. There's this dark synchronicity around this, where apparently some guy with a brain injury drove a car from Las Vegas to New York, Park Avenue, and ended up shooting not just a CEO involved with the NFL, but also somebody who is involved, I think, in like Blackrock, like some sort of like big real estate hedge fund sort of. I'm not exactly sure the details, but it was a funny thing for a number of reasons. First of all, because apparently the other person who was shot, who is some sort of big wig in this, people who put a lot of the banking people who put money into real estate and all this kind of stuff, and there's a certain the inequality or whatever, right? Like, there's something about, apparently the person who got killed, who was the real estate mogul for, I think it was Blackrock, it was like an accident. Like, they just so happened to be in the building at that time, and the guy was just there to kill the NFL CEO, and he just like accidentally killed a real estate mogul. And then, like, what's also interesting is now you see this thing when it comes about, like, okay, the political divisions or something like that. People are also mentioning that there's Donald Trump trying to take this whole dynamic and make it into a really bipartisan thing, or no, I guess partisan thing, where you have, it's like that Republicans or right-wing people are being targeted by crazed radical left lunatics, but then there's also some Democratic people who were assassinated. So there's this whole both sides thing. But the thing is, so you have this whole people making lists of all this stuff going on, like saying this and that. But no one, like, are they mentioning this whole thing about the NFL person or the person who is the real estate mogul? And like this one story seems to be getting censored, and I'm I'm recording this, and I'm going to upload it with a sense of kind of openness and trust, and that good faith that, you know, I'm basically trying. There's something about this, like, if I try to make a, if I try, there's something the way that art making, or like, I don't know. I feel. I hope I'm not. I always have this thing where it's like I kind of have this fanboy thing about, like, whatever, I support this guy on Patreon and I like his work, and so I have this whole kind of thing where I'm always like me, I'm not worthy. I'm not to be referencing this, like, of like, maybe I'm just you know, there's something about, like, I'm feeling like there's something about what this course was about that was a bit over my head when I took it, but part of it is the visionary quality of art. And in the course, he was talking about stuff like the way that Wilco. I was never really a fan of the band Wilco, but apparently when September 11th happened, there's all this unconscious stuff about September 11th that, like, worked its way into the artwork. But there's something I'm just gonna say is that, like, one of the reasons why I'm trying to do, like, it may seem unusual that whatever I'm into, I like to do astrology, or that I have a bunch of projects going, but this astrology channel has the most followers, and I don't really feel like I fit in with other astrologers, really. But there's something about, even if I wasn't going to do astrology or tarot or divination, and I was just going to be an artist, it's like I have to sort of, like, intentionally induce myself into a state of naivety, and to say that you're like, oh, okay, well, if I'm going to be pulling, where are these ideas coming from, right? This is one thing that Alan Moore talked about, where it's like, Alan Moore was asked this question about, like, where do you get your ideas for what you're doing? And that this led him to become an occultist, basically, or that there's some kind of, like, thing about wherever, like, I'm not, or if I'm choosing, if I try to make artwork, and I try to make artwork that's in conversation with all this dramatic stuff going on, there's this kind of question that I don't, you know, I'm not making artwork with this deliberate intention, like somebody's gonna watch my video and they're gonna be like, that's it, I'm gonna have to go and, like, kill the CEO of the NFL. Like, this is my intention going into the video, but that I have my own things that I'm struggling with, that I'm not at peace, because I feel like I never, you know, it's like what do you, like the whole geeks versus jocks things. I feel like I'm basically not, you know, I'm out of step with the world, because there's a certain default sense of what a normal person is supposed to be like, and I'm just inclined to do other things, and I feel at odds with everything, and I feel like that it's being, like, the pressure to conform to being, like, a football bro, or, like, a frat boy, or, like, blah blah blah. And sorry, that's just not me. Maybe I'm a sensitive, effeminate. I'm gonna sip tea and play with tarot cards and paint, like, the artsy fartsy painting. I'm not really that, you know. But there's some kind of, like that, you know. We don't need weak ass men. We need some fucking, like, you know, you know, like some, like, football bros to get it, you know. Even Johnny Rotten says, like, the whole, like, the guy who invented, you know, the first punk rock band has gone over to the alt-right, saying that we need real lads, we need some real men to take care of shit and get it done and all this kind of stuff. And, like, it's basically just all this, you have to be a bunch of football hooligans in a big mob or something like that. And, like, I don't know, I'm at least grateful that I'm not living in the UK, I'm not living in America, I'm a Canadian, and I'm the thing about, I'm trying to, at least, if I do this as it is, I find embracing basically Western spiritualism and divination and astrology at least gives me a kind of a tradition from which to make sense of things. And there's something about where I often feel at odds with this tradition, or that there's something about where the way I am and my mentality and the way that most woo woo new age people tend to be, I feel kind of at odds with these people as well. I feel like I'm just an individual or something like this, right? There's something about I've had in the same way that if I'm doing a divination and if I'm drawn for some reason, even in spite of myself, to talk about the chapter in the book to do with terrorism, and then this is a dark synchronicity because it's it filters through my mind in such a way that that's just the way I approach it, or that if I'm going to be making art, that it filters in. If I'm trying to be like, I'm not intentionally, like, whether you're doing something unconsciously, not intentionally, versus if you're aware of what you're doing and you want to, obviously if you were voluntarily choosing something, you don't want to voluntarily choose destructive, negative stuff. You want the world to be peaceful and you want everybody to be happy, but it's like to accept your own limitations, or that you are just I'm not, you know what I'm trying to say? Oh my god. There's something about it where I'm reading more books, I'm studying more things, and the unfortunate part about it is that in my experience, which is like, I have to filter out a lot of things that I experience subjectively, and to be private about what it's like to be neurospicy or neurodivergent or autistic or schizophrenic or whatever it is. But I always had this hunch that by trying to understand the esoteric tradition, that would shed light on what's going on a little bit better. And I feel like I'm making progress, and that it gives I can. There's something about it where I'm unable to take the position of being a rationalist, scientific, or I don't know. I mean, to say scientific implies that there's this sort of like division where there's science on one hand and there's a bunch of new age paranormal stuff on the other hand. But there's something about, I'm basically at the point right now where I may not politically align with a lot of New Agers or Western spiritualists, but I'll give another example. Is I was starting watching this podcast called the Loneliness Industry Podcast, and I think it's a really good podcast, although I basically disagree with it because it takes an attitude that against Western spiritualism and in favor of this sort of Lacanian psychoanalytic thing, which basically says that like there's an inherent lack or absence to the world, and anything in terms of like visionary experiences or hallucinations or you're just producing a bunch of fantasies to fill up the void, to inflate yourself because you don't want to deal with how lowly and weak and your humiliating existence as a little man who there's nothing special about, and it's all just a bunch of delusions or something like that, right? There's something about it where it's like I guess maybe that's helpful so you don't get too inflated in your ego or something like that. But I do like from the perspective of having a kind of a neurodivergent other perception of reality, I can't help but I don't have a choice but to take the new age position on things. Whatever, I mean, even that could be a bit vague, right? Because it's not, there's something I've seen, I have developed a certain perspective where I have to take a position of, I don't even know how to describe it, but basically, I would put together tarot and astrology and even other cultures of divination as I Ching, working together somehow in a system that I would describe as Hermeticism. And I have also been reading the Christian meditations, or Meditations on the Tarot, which is a Christian mystical take on Hermeticism, and this has been coming up for me as well. There's something about the fact that I was raised Unitarian, and that my grandfather was a Catholic, but he really didn't like the Catholics, that I have some kind of ancestral block against Christianity and Catholicism. But there's something about it where it's like, I think if you understand how, for some people, their choice to be Christian could be very much just affirming their family tradition, that for me, my experience of my family, like, it would be, this idea of honor your father and mother, honor your grandparents, it would be like, in order to honor my family and my ancestry, I feel like I have to honor the fact that my grandparents did not have the best, like, experience with Catholicism. Like, that was their, or that they were kind of like, you know, a bunch of like heretics that were, or people that were outside of that. And I was raised Unitarian. And also in all this, there's also this weird timing of the assassination of in the NFL and all the CEO happened around the time I started watching Succession. So I've been watching Succession, and then in the midst of watching Succession, there's like at one point in time, there's a merger where the corporation that the Roy family merges with another corporation that's more left wing, and when they have the meeting, there's this reference to Unitarianism, and there's a reference to Shakespeare. In that they're like, we're so Unitarian, instead of worshiping God and Jesus, we're going to worship Shakespeare, and we're going to be all pretentious. And then there's this this is basically the left-right split, basically. The division is that there's this kind of, people don't, I mean, I admit maybe it sort of comes off as being a bit bourgeois, or whatever. In that, there's a certain kind of like low culture, high culture kind of thing. And there's a certain amount of like privilege that you have to have in order to be into like arts and humanities or something like that. This is just tends to be my personality. Like, I've always been more attracted in the direction of arts and literature rather than being like really into like sciences or being a sports kind of person. Like, this is just my personality. I think part of what astrology has helped me with, I mean, astrology itself is also kind of limiting, because you could compare yourself with somebody who has the same birthday as you, who really doesn't have the same dynamics. But you can at least accept that there's this idea that you have this, you know, your soul has some kind of limitation, or there's some sort of limitation in your art incarnation that you are drawn to one thing but not the other. Maybe this is just a long ramble. Where am I going with all this? Maybe I'm lost. The point about this, well, I don't know, maybe I'm just using this in a long way around to sort of describe my position, which is basically a kind of a pagan hermeticism, and only just because my own family raised me Unitarian, and from this position, I have actually been to a Zen Buddhist meditation center, and I do have some experience working with meditation teachers and stuff like that. But there's some kind of like, there's this issue about like what is like trying to like define yourself by like, you have to convert to being like, I'm going to convert to one specific religion you know, honor my ancestors, and my ancestors are a bunch of people who hated the Catholics, and I'm at least better. But most I can do is be like more open about being interested in learning about the Bible than my mother or my sister would be. There's this whole kind of problem about like, I feel like I have to like take what I like. There's some, but there's just work with that, however I've been raised and whatever comes most naturally to me and all this kind of stuff. And within this whole framework, a kind of like a polytheistic pagan hermeticism is just sort of works for me. And that, but beyond this, you could also put all this behind, and then there could be like develop experimental forms of like art divination. But most of this is just sort of like it relates to this kind of like problem about free will and creativity and originality, and that if you're trying to like come up with an idea for something that's totally without even intentionally trying to make a divination, you're just going to be like, oh, I don't know, you want to make an artistic statement about what's going on, and then like somehow, I just want to assure you people that here at Dan's Astrology, we're not trying to influence the Americans to do violent, destructive things. I want to affirm the principles of peace and compassion and understanding and all this kind of stuff. And don't, you know, but in the midst of all of this, there is a certain division between when you talk about succession and the media, and the way that you have these big multinational corporations which are taking, like, the internet used to be some place that was like an exciting, cool place to be, because compared to watching cable TV, it was sort of like indie and underground. And now all those, if you watch Succession, there's this interesting thing going on about how, you know, you take something like Tumblr, right? Like how Tumblr got bought up by Yahoo or whatever, or that by the way that like, even like BuzzFeed or something like that. Like there's all these things that are these like big, huge mega corporations, and you've got the American right wing. I don't think they really believe in anything other than making money. And even, it's like, there's some kind of, in order to compete in the media ecosystem, it's like the people who become popular are like personality types who acclimatize themselves to this crazy media environment, right? And this is like the same environment that just goes to like prop up this whole like, it's a world where the highest paid college profession is the football coach, right? It's like to create a whole bunch of like stupid NFL people, or like we're gonna have a bunch of meatheads with concussions and a bunch of fucking Walmart employees, and that's gonna be your America world, right? And like you're just trying to like create a media environment where the dumbest fucking shit rises to the top, right? This is basically, I'm gonna just clarify my approach to why I don't use TikTok, I don't use Instagram. I use Facebook a little bit, but I'm trying to basically, instead, a lot of the content on here is basically people reacting to like this kind of like lowest common denominator. And to me, my choice of why I'd rather go to like Byung Han or something like that, or try to read the classics, is like, my strategy has been, instead of just reacting to TikTok videos or trends on social media, I'm going to just unplug from all that, tune out, and then try to find better stuff to pay attention to, and then react to that instead. And to somehow, to me, that seems like just a better use of time, I guess. But there's this kind of like obvious power dynamic where they're gonna want, if you're like when I'm trying to like if I'm trying to like make a popular channel, if the videos that get most popular is when I try to suppress all of that intellectual stuff and then talk about something like the time that Coldplay put the couple kissing on the jumbotron, but then they were like having a affair or like a workplace relationship or something like that. And when I talk about that stuff, my video I get way more that's how my demographic. That's the demographic of people who follow this channel. That's what they like, right? I'm just, if something like that comes up and if I have an opportunity to play off of it and get the numbers, I will. But I'm not really, my center of gravity isn't like the gossip column of the fucking Rupert Murdoch owned newspaper at the checkout store. Like you're like, and I'm like some sort of like, like that's the kind of where horoscopes come from, though, right? There's something about the whole horoscope, astrology, like, or the psychic hotline industry that it's a sort of like trash stratum of like pop culture bullshit, right? And there's something about how I'm trying to do my best to, like, how I relate to raising the vibration, that there shouldn't be this false barrier behind talking about things intellectually or trying to raise the conversation to a higher level instead of having to play everything from like the dumbest like TikTok horoscope Instagram reel nonsense, right? And but at the same time, I have to also, this is like the same, I'm posting this at the same platform where like Mr. Beast and Jubilee and stuff like that does really well. So I have to be aware that that's the kind of climate that we're in or whatever, right? And I guess what I'm trying to say about this too is I watch some other people might talk about these like, oh my god, there's stuff like, the psychic stuff, like remote viewing and stuff like that, right? That I am not saying that I have any ability to do anything like that, or that I have my own, I'm going to keep private whatever my own differences in perceiving reality are. But there's some kind of like, for me, it's like, I'm it's much. There's some odd thing about it is like I don't know anything about fucking remote viewing techniques or like I'm gonna astral project or something like that. But if I try to, like, I could predict what's gonna happen by making a fucking weird music video. And that if there's another example is that I recently got into this band, the Mountain Goats, and the Mountain Goats just are putting out this album called Across the Fire from Peter Balkan, and apparently this came to the artist, the creator, in a dream, right? The name of the album came to him in a dream, or that there's this kind of like, there's other bands that I like that talk about like bypassing the rational mind in their writing process, right? And it's like when you bypass your rational brain and you're dealing more with the unconscious, then the problem with this, I can do that, but I'm not, I can't, I'd be kind of disingenuous by saying it's naive at this point, right? If I make a music video and I deliberately choose to make a reference in my music video to Las Vegas and to the NFL, and then if somebody drives from Las Vegas to shoot the NFL CEO, I can't make another music video and do the same thing and then like pretend that, I'm not saying that I am intentionally trying to put that intention into my video, but that in my frustration with everything that's going on, that it's like there's some kind of negative energy that I'm dealing with, right? There's some kind of negative energy that I'm working with, and that I don't know, is it better just not to do that? Is it better to just try to like go be more kumbaya or something like that? Like or would that be fake, right? Like, is it like, would I just be repressing, making that more of a shadow id thing? What's good about, or the other thing about this too is that when it comes to things about like psychosis and mental health stuff. There's this idea in Finland. They came up with this idea called open dialogue, right? Where that they give people the opportunity rather than to talk about things up front or whatever. And that I think that there's some sort of great thing about like psychoanalysis or talk therapy, or even to some, I don't know if I think it's good to put like all your stuff just publicly out there for consumption, but I think that there's something good about all this is that like rather than having this sort of thing where it's just some sort of like, you know, dark secret thing that you can't talk about, you have the opportunity to like to talk about it openly, to make it an open dialogue. And I think that the part of one of what I was kind of getting into with the Byung Han thing is that Byung Han was saying that there's a certain violence or this destructive force that happens precisely because there's a situation created where there's all this stuff that you can't talk about, right? People are like this idea that instead of having like, we're going to have this, people have a disagreement or we have a frustration where we're going to resolve this, you know, by talking about it and doing some constructive problem solving. We create this world where people feel like nobody can talk to each other anymore, and we just have to use brute force and violence, you know, to make anything happen. And that's not what I agree. I think that, you know, I was raised in a way that to value rational thinking and deliberate, clear communication over just basically, like unconscious intimidation or something, right? And there's so much about this, which is like, I think this is what drives people crazy, is that there's certain like, there's all this stuff going on that's just sort of like, you're supposed to just, it's like there's a deliberate, like, what happens when all this unconscious stuff is like, well, I mean, I can see it pretty consciously myself, when you guys want to talk about it? No, you don't. You just want to make everything as frustrating as possible. So the only way people think they can change things is through acting out their violence. It's not what I agree about. And if I don't want to feed into that energy, but nonetheless, it's like, there's also an I do like watching videos from people who are less new. Somebody did a video talking about how the internet itself is just a big psyop, right? Like, what if all this content, all this media is just there to fuck with you, is just there to manipulate you, is just there to frustrate you, is just there to think that there's no way that you can, like, or the contradiction that there's so much opportunity for information and communication, and yet, people have to resort to violence to get their point across. I prefer to spend my time making art and music and doing creative things, or I appreciate the privilege and the luxury that I have the opportunity to do this. And, excuse me, I'm going to take advantage of this the best I can and consider it a gift, a blessing that I have some creative ability. But at least doing the astrology divination thing, it gives me a chance to explore some of this in a way where I can at least verbally express what's going on. I can communicate it in a clear and direct way rather than having it buried behind a lot of cryptic symbolism or something like this, right? I don't know. I'm taking a chance with this anyways. It's eclipse season. Is Mercury Kazemi coming up? Thanks for watching. I don't know.